Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. So obviously, I was off last week, as a lot of people saw. I was down in. Let me get this there. I was actually down in Kentucky and Indiana at our doing our picks at both MGP. We got some behind the scenes stuff, but I won't bore you with all that stuff. We've got a really fun show tonight where I think an awful lot of you are going to, if you're new to the brand, I think you're going to quickly become a huge fan ambassador of what it is that Bill and his team have, I'll say, rebuilt. He's got great stories, and I'll let him kind of share a little bit more about that stuff. But tonight will be one of those nights where, again, if you're really into the whiskey history and just knowing about a brand, where they began, kind of when things a little, I don't want to say fell apart, but, during Prohibition, things obviously changed for a lot of brands. Well, now we've kind of reintroduced the brand over the course of the last few years. So it'll be really interesting to hear Bill kind of share some of those stories, and just we'll go through basically tonight. We've got, as you can see, we've got the Old McBrayer Bottled and Bond. We've got the McBrayer, which is their barrel strength bourbon. And we also have, I've got a sample right here of the McBrayer, the Cedar Brook. So really excited to get into specifically those three whiskeys tonight. And then obviously let Bill kind of share a little bit of information. But before we do, let me just say hi to a few people that were in here early on. Sugar Kitty, of course, was in here. Mr. James Taylor. Stacy, Four Leaf Whiskey. Good to see you, Stace. Mr. Royar does cocktails. Boyd, how you doing? Mr. Taylor, I said, Kimmy, I wanted to talk to you and make sure your event went really well. I saw some photos. Things look good. So, Mr. JG, good to see you, buddy. Deborah C, good to see you, Deborah. Mr. Schwartz, good to see you. JG got the ball buster in here himself. Let's see who else we got here. Mr. Widener, good to see you. Mr. Roger Reese, good to see you as well. The doer of stuff, good to see you, buddy. So a lot of people in here right now. More people pop in here shortly. But without kind of wasting any more time, we'll bring Bill on here and kind of let him share a little bit of info about himself. We'll sip through some of the whiskeys, each one as we're kind of sipping through. He can tell a little bit more about the brand, the history, and we'll kind of get into a little bit of that. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments, and we'll make sure that Bill is able to answer some of those things tonight. So without further ado, let me bring on the man of the hour, Mr. McBreer. How are you, sir?
Hey, Scott. Hey, thanks for having me this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on here. I know we've talked about doing this for quite some time, and finally we've been able to put this together. And I told you backstage, I'm equally as excited, I think, about anybody else who's coming in with the anticipation of knowing and learning more about the history, the brand, where things are now, and kind of what the future holds for the brand. So I guess, so that people have a little understanding of kind of how things began, or from your side of things, do you mind just sharing a little information about yourself and kind of how that all began for you?
Yeah, sure. I have a lot of friends there in Wisconsin. I'm in the commercial loading, dock, and door business. I've been doing that now for 28 years, and a lot of our manufacturers are there in Wisconsin, and we have a lot of friends and a lot of fans from up there. And it was about 12, 13 years ago when my daughter was looking to go to college. We were checking out a small college in Danville, Kentucky. And my dad said, it was Center College. And I was telling my dad about it. And he said, the McBrayers gave some money to that college. I'm like, who you talking about? And he said it was the McBrayer in the whiskey business. And I was like, really? Because I remember when I was a kid, back in the 1970s, late 70s, Dad was a sales guy. And there was a brand still, Old McBrayer was still being made in the late 1970s, actually here in Cincinnati. And he said he'd give it to his customers at Christmas time. And next time he saw me, thanking for giving it to him, they said, don't ever give us again. It was rot gut, nasty whiskey from the, blended whiskey, And so I just thought Old McBrayer was rot gut, nasty whiskey. And he said this guy gave some money to the school. So I was sitting around all weekend looking for the McBrayer scholarship at Center College down in Danville. And I didn't find one. And I Googled McBrayer whiskey, and Jack Sullivan on prepro.com wrote a blog post back in 2005, and it was W.H. McBrayer, the judge of good whiskey. And I read this blog post and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is a rock star. And I probably didn't work for 6 weeks and Googled on page 1000 and started researching our brands. And next thing you know, I'm telling my wife I'm going to get in the whiskey business.
That's how it all starts. Once you tell the wife, you gotta follow through. I'm sure there was a little bit of pushback. If she's anything like mine, it wouldn't have been just that simple. That's for sure. So yeah. So I mean, I think just kind of going back and when you and I met again, going back probably 2-3 years or at least now at this point, it was a brand that, I mean, other than when you kind of explained a little bit about, what the new brand was, I honestly was unfamiliar with this as a brand of over 100 years ago. So I think for what it is we kind of have in front of us, let's kind of go back a little bit and maybe if we can just share a little bit about, how it started, who it started with, just to give these guys a little idea of that.
Well, the McBrayers were from Scotland, obviously, and they came over. There was 3 brothers that came over, and they fought in the American Revolution. And one of the brothers' son was a surveyor, came over in the James Herod settlement, and was surveying the Wilderness Trail there in Kentucky. He went back and got his father James and his 5 brothers, and they were granted a couple thousand acres for their service in the Revolutionary War and settled in around the Lawrenceburg area. William Harrison, he was a 3rd generation McBrayer, and he established their distillery in 1847 in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. It was a small distillery at the time. He was a judge. He was the first judge in Anderson County. So he became known as the judge. He later became a state senator, and he started to expand his distillery in the 1850s. It started as the W.H. McBrayer Distillery, and then he later changed it to the Cedar Brook Distillery at the urging of his wife. He later then won the gold medal for the best whiskey in the world in 1873 in Vienna, Austria, putting Kentucky bourbon on the international map. He also then won the gold medal in 1876, and he was very influential to the bourbon community in Lawrenceburg and Anderson County. And if you really go back to the history, I mean, that was like the pre-prohibition capital of the world, was in Lawrenceburg. And so one of his employees was T.B. Rippey. He helped T.B. Rippey buy his first distillery in the 1860s. He then later, bought out W.H., and then his sons, became the Rippey Brothers Distillery, which is now the Wild Turkey Distillery. He had his master distiller for 25 years was W.B. Saffel. And then he helped him start his distillery in the late 1880s before he passed away. Bond and Lillard was influenced by McBrayer. You had Mary Dowling there in town. And then his adopted nephew was Charles Dedman. And for his wedding present, he gave him the money and land to start his distillery over in Harrodsburg. His brand was Kentucky Owl. And so he, when I started to go down, I thought his history was remarkable, and I had never heard his story. And so for me, my goal was to retell his story and hopefully get him in the Bourbon Hall of Fame someday. That was the whole purpose of starting this business. The McBrayer brands, his cousin started the Old McBrayer Distillery over in New Market, Kentucky in 1870. W.H. later bought that distillery. It was bought and sold a couple times. It was later sold to E.H. Taylor. And E.H. Taylor was buying McBrayer's whiskey when he first started. And so, he was one of the most influential people in Kentucky bourbon at the time.
Yeah.
And so when I started going down to Kentucky and I introduced myself to a few people, I thought he was a big deal. And they said, "You're a McBrayer?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, you need to come sit down." And I even learned more, when I was down there, even though I thought it was a big deal, being my name and wanting to bring it back. And it's just been a joy to bring it back and to share the story with about him. And we got a lot to talk about tonight. We can go into a lot of his stories but that's, how it started. And
well, that is, I mean, that is a big deal. I mean, all of those names, I think a lot of us are very familiar with all of those, but I think, those bits and pieces of the history of kind of how their stuff started, wouldn't necessarily have been the case had it not been for your family. So
yeah,
I think when you put all these bits and pieces, that's the fun part of learning and understanding this history, of knowing what your family's involvement was with a lot of the brands that we're very familiar with nowadays. So
yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask was, as things were kind of going along there, like in the 1800s, at what point, what was it, prohibition that kind of stopped all of the McBreer part?
No. So when WH passed away, his son-in-law was a distiller. His name was D.L. Moore. He took over the distillery. He did sell it to the Whiskey Trust in the late 1899.
Mhm.
And then E.H. Taylor owned the Old McBrayer distillery. And then they were actually making Old McBrayer over in Frankfurt later. It was now Castle and Key.
Wow.
But our brands, Cedar Brook and Old McBrayer, they both survived Prohibition up into the 1980s. So they were part of Kentucky bourbon for over 130 years, the McBrayers were. And when National Distillers sold to Jim Beam let the McBrayer trademarks expire. And so they were kind of mothballed, if you will, from the middle 1980s or so until I learned about it about 2012 or so.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
I mean,
I've seen some of those. I've seen some of those kind of like posters of like, the dead distilleries, and you always wonder, like, whose family is out there that still has some, I don't want to say rights to it. I'm sure they probably don't, but who would be willing to kind of go and revitalize these brands, such as you did. And I think it's a very cool thing, just to, again, that's probably a fraction of everything that and you've been told throughout the years. But I think it gives us a little idea of, again, where things began and how some of the brands that we all, love and know now, where they started and where they were kind of getting some of their whiskey from, and you want to say, well, had it not been for McBrayer, some of these other brands may never have gotten off the ground. You don't know what that would have.
Well, you never know, right? And from what I understand, when I got in it about 12 years ago, bourbon was just starting to take off again. And so even getting my family trademarks wasn't easy. So for example, I was able to get W.H. McBrayer because that was his name, and that was how he started. However, Old McBrayer, I re-registered Old McBrayer, and I got sued. And I was like, who's suing me? And it was the Scotch Whiskey Association. I said, why? And they said, well, McBrayer's a Scottish name, and if you put McBrayer whiskey on a bottle, you're going to mislead them that it's made in Scotland. I said, well, you tell them to pound it. And so, but they were really suing people back then because they were worried about the rise in bourbon. And so we were able to settle that lawsuit, and I was able to get it. I had to call it Kentucky bourbon, so I was okay with that, or bourbon made in the United States. And then getting Cedar Brook wasn't easy because there's a wine now called Cedar Brook. So I was able to trademark W.H. McBrayer Cedar Brook bourbon, excluding wine, and that took like several thousands of dollars in attorney bills to figure out how to get that one right. And so, getting brands today is not easy, let alone getting an old brand, because a lot of them have been swept back up by some of the big folks out there.
Yeah. I guess, that's probably to that point, there are people that know, if I buy these old brand names and we put them under our umbrella, now we have the rights to be able to do what they want. I know before we were kind of talking about, the dance and kind of that whole little bit of an issue there. And again, when you are part of that family, I'm sure it's got to be awfully frustrating to not be able to utilize those family names and that history. I understand the legal part of it, but it's a little bit of a shame, when you hear that.
It's tough. I mean, Wally's doing a great job with what he's doing and resurrecting what he's doing down there for sure. But but for me, I just thought I wanted to own the family brands. I didn't think I was going to have to make bourbon. to keep them. And so I got these trademarks. And then this attorney sends me a bill 6 months later. And I said, well, what's this for? She said, well, did you use it? I go, what do you mean use it? She goes, did you use your trademark? I said, no, you have to use it. And she said, well, yeah, you can't just have trademarks and not use it. And I said, oh, well, can I put the name on a shirt? She said, no, it's Bourbon. And I said, well, all right, how long do I have? And they said, well, you got about 3 to 5 years. I said, okay, keep extending them. And I called my dad and I said, Dad, hurry up and retire. We got to figure out how to make some bourbon. And so we went to a still show down in Louisville with the Craft Distillers Association. And I walked out of that show, and they said, well, we were $250,000 into it. This was, like I said, 10 years ago. And they said, before we ever started. And I was like, oh, my hobby just got more expensive. And so as we get ready to crack open our WH McBrayer, that was our first batch. And I was able to find a distiller in Kentucky that I can't talk about them, but they do make a sweet mash down in Danville, Kentucky. I can tell you that. And I had this letter that I found from W.H. McBrayer to E.H. Taylor from 1870. And on the back of that letter, it was talked about on a blog post by Michael Veach and Chuck Crowdery. And it was on Bourbon Enthusiast. It was almost like a message board. And on the back of that letter, it had this mash bill. And it was an 88% corn mash bill. And I was able to, I took this letter and they talked about somebody needed to remake this and go in the barrel at 105 proof. And I took it to these guys and I said, hey, can you make this for us? And they said, yeah, sure, we can make it. I said, well, could you make me 1 barrel? I just need to make it so I can fill my trademarks. Like, no. And so they were able to make me 10 barrels. And that's how we got started.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, that's, again, it's the fun part to hear, again, how that all kind of began. You just wanted the name. Ultimately, now you realize I have to be in some type of, production, and you want 1 barrel, you get 10, and probably down the rabbit hole you've gone.
Oh yeah, now I'm into it with thousands of barrels. So yeah, I'm all in now.
That's good. That's good. Well, let's do this. Let's kind of let's shift over to kind of some of the whiskey. Now in my glass, I think since we were kind of talking a little bit about the beginning of the WH McBrayer, I've got the batch 1. So
you got batch 1.
Yeah, okay. I think you've got 1 on top of that.
Well, that's batch 1. Yeah, that's a unicorn there.
So I'm just going to kind of sip on that. And I guess, maybe what we can do is we can just kind of talk a little bit about, that brand itself and kind of the story behind that.
Yeah. So I have batch 4 here.
Actually, you know what? Let me do that. Let me actually, I've got batch 4 right here. Let's talk a little bit about that one, because now, again, let me ask you this real quick. For anybody wanting to know availability, are some of these actually available as we speak?
Yeah, so we have a couple hundred of those still left of each of those. And you can get those on my website. If you go to McBreerLegacySpirits.com, and if you click on the spirits button, underneath that, it'll say shop now. And then it'll go through here and you can get it picked up in Covington, or you can ship it to 43 different states through our retailer in DC. And you can order it right on the website.
I'm just going to bring this up for everybody. You guys can probably see this right now. I'm just going to bring this up so you can get a little idea of kind of at least what things are going to look like, and you can see all of that. So there's what you're going to get when you get to the website. Just so that for a visual, so anybody watching now in the replay, the portion for purchasing is just under spirits, you said?
Yep, it's spirits.
Okay.
And then shop now. If you go to the top there. Shop now. The button, the gold button right there.
Oh, there we go. Okay. The one that was right in front of me. Okay, there you go. So you guys get a little idea of where you need to go for any purchasing needs of any of the McBreer stuff. So there you go.
Thank you.
All right. So getting back to this. All right. So let's kind of get into the WH McBreyer. This is your barrel strength, correct? Yeah.
So in that letter, Michael Veach and Chuck Crowdery were talking about this, and they said somebody needed to remake this whiskey. And we used an heirloom corn. We had it grown there in Kentucky for us. And the thing that they asked us to do, they wanted us to go in the barrel at 105 proof. So that was barrel proof, or barrel entry was 105.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular one is barrel strength at 106. So it was just up one. That's a combination of 2 7-year-old barrels and 10 5-year-old barrels.
Okay.
That's heirloom Bloody Butcher corn, 88% corn mash bill, 88 6 and 6, and
Wow.
so it's going to be unique, and it was meant to be unique. We wanted to do that. We have it in the box there that's to your left, or to your right, I guess. And it comes in the box. They're all serial numbered. There was only 2,000 of batch 4 that we made. And the whole point was to honor him and do something unique so we could reintroduce him to the bourbon community.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, I think, as you began kind of that journey of creating all of this stuff, to now tie all of this together with not only the bottle style, but the labeling and really kind of honing in on that mash bill. Did anybody ever tell you or see like where they kind of found like the actual mash bill? I'm sure that probably wasn't as easy as
yeah. So that was in the Taylor Hayes file that was at the Filson Society, and that's the historical center there in Louisville for bourbon. And so Michael Veach was the historian. He was going through the Taylor files, and he found that letter. Wow. And so I have a copy of that letter on our blog post off of our website as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it was great. And the way they wrote back then, their handwriting, it had his, he signed it. So we used his signature on the back label of the bottle there. When he started, it was the W.H. McBrayer distillery. So we wanted to start with that. That was his monogram that he had on several of his bottles that we were able to recreate and really try to pay homage to him and what he did with his bourbon. Yeah.
I mean, it's the most important part of this brand, kind of where it all began. Without that, there is none of this, right?
Correct.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
I love the nose. I would agree. Like you do get a little bit of that corniness, but in a more developed kind of way. I suppose that at 80, you said 88%.
Yeah, it's an 88% corn.
I mean, with that, I mean, how are you going to get around there being a little bit of that corn influence? You're not going to.
A little bit. We got quite a few baking spices, I think, on here.
For sure. Yeah.
I get a little bit of a chocolate or a plum note, maybe.
Yep. I think there's a really kind of like, for me, like baking spice. When you said that, like there was something that was sweeter, like a nutmeg, nice cinnamon notes that are definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
It's very bright. Maybe a slight even little butterscotch. And I think this happens for me on heavier corn mash bills, is a little bit of this, especially because you've probably got some older stuff, the 7-year stuff, that corn is now interacting with that barrel, and that butterscotchy kind of starts to come through a little bit for me.
Yeah.
All right. Nice and oily, good mouthfeel, nice spice to it. I do like
it, right?
Yeah. I love the idea of your barrel entry proof and this thing not being very far off of that. It's a low barrel strength bourbon, which is nice. A lot of full flavor in this thing. Nice, great spice on it. Fantastic spice.
Yeah. I start to get a little bit more of the fruit notes coming through a little bit for me. And then, it's got a little bit of a finish to it, right? It's not like, it doesn't burn, but it's long. No. Do you get much of do you get that little savory note on the back end?
Yeah, I think, the nice part about this is, I mean, it's drinking, not hot. It's nice and oily, non-chill filtered, so I think, again, at that lower barrel strength, proof, a lot of those full flavors are there as much, if not more, than something in that 115, 120 range. So, even though it's a lower proof, don't get tricked into thinking that this thing's going to drink like a regular, let's say 100 proofer. I mean, this thing has all of that full bodied effect that you're going to get from a barrel strength bourbon.
No, I agree. I mean, it's a really nice sipper in the evening. But as I said, it's not too hot. It's not going to
No,
crush you too bad.
no. That's where I think it makes this nice, because, we've got obviously the 100 proof here, but the difference here is we're at, you said 106, correct on this one?
Yeah, 106 on that one.
Again, at barrel strength, I mean, a big difference. For me, having this slightly lower proof barrel strength bourbon, I think for a lot of people offers even more of a value because in my opinion, I think a lot of people feel they want to drink higher proof whiskeys more than they say they do. So I think when you get a whiskey like this at 106 proof at barrel strength, it becomes kind of the perfect monster, so to speak. It allows it to be a little bit more sippable with all of those full flavors that you want to get from, like I said, one of those 115, 120 proof, bourbon. So really, really nice bourbon.
I mean, I like 120 proof bourbon once in a while too, but
yeah.
This for me, this one hits the spot quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Good mouthfeel, nice and oily. I think that finish kind of lengthens the more you kind of sip on it. Late, like lingering spice, got those kind of creamy caramels, butterscotch notes. I know you had mentioned some fruit notes. There's definitely some of that. Yep. I think this is where this bourbon kind of becomes that I don't want to say easy sipping 106, but again, it makes it really, really enjoyable at this proof. And I love, this thing, there's oil all over this thing. So, it is,
this, right?
Man, it is an oily bourbon. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. You got a lot going on there.
An awful lot going on. So with this brand, in terms of where you are with things now coming off of a little bit of the history.
Yeah.
What's the idea behind this brand kind of now and kind of, going forward a little bit with it?
Yeah. So we have the 3 brands, right? So this is what I call our legacy brand, our heritage brand. It has heirloom grains. It's got this low barrel entry proof. It's going to be a small production type of product. We have about 450 barrels of that aging now. We are trying to, figure out how we're going to make some more of that as we go. We like the mash bill. We want to keep it out there. And we want this to be a small type of release, right? So if this gets to 50 barrels a year, I think it'd be fantastic, right? And that brand. So, that one is our something that's going to be unique and just maybe hard to get. But it's going to be honoring him, and that's what we want to do with that one.
Yeah, and 2,000 bottles. That's a nice small batch barrel strength release. It allows it to be manageable for you. Obviously you can scale it, depending on all of that. But I think for this being, like you said, the legacy type of release, the special one for you guys, and again, paying that homage to them and utilizing that mash bill. Let me go back to that. With the mash bill, did you ever come across anything that you would be able to pull, like anything like a yeast strain or anything? Was there ever anything like that where you could tie anything back to what it is you're doing now through distillation at all?
So, I've had some Cedar Brook bourbon from the 1800s. There's a bottle over at Bardstown Bourbon in their vintage collection, but I don't think you can pull the yeast strain out of that and get that. And so we weren't able to find any yeast strains, but we were able to find a legacy style yeast strain when we made that one. And so we used heirloom corn, heirloom grains. And it's an heirloom kind of mash bill, right? It was a lot of corn back then.
Right.
Probably almost fits more of a Tennessee whiskey mash bill today than a Kentucky bourbon mash bill.
Right.
And so, and it's different, right? Not everybody wants a really high corn mash bill. A lot of people do. So that's why that one is the way it's going to be, right?
Yeah.
And we'll play with that. We might do some different heirloom grains, and maybe have a couple different series along that. But this is how we wanted to get started. This was the business plan. They said, hey, you got to make it. Hey, I got this letter. These guys that are really smart historians said somebody need to make it. So that's how we were going to get in business, and that's how we started.
Well, that's good. I mean, that ties everything back to the original history of all that. So to have that and that distillation, I mean, it's a really cool story. And again, I think it makes it personal, obviously, not only to you, but for a lot of people. I think this is where, doing a show like this allows for people, when they do get a bottle, to kind of understand that a little bit more, where it all started and what it is they're drinking and why they're drinking that. Because in all honesty, this could just be a high corn mash bill and nobody could know anything about the rest of it. So putting all of that together makes it that much more, I think, special and enjoyable when you can put kind of all of those pieces together. So,
and when we blend these things together every year, there's a little bit of different nuances between each batch. So we're putting a different sticker on it. The box looks great on a bar, right? And they're like, hey, what's that box? And you don't see too many bourbons in a box, let alone a square box. You got the tubes there, out there, but and it's not cheap to put it in a box, that's for sure.
No.
And on the inside of the box, you've got a little bit of a story there on the inside edge, and it's just a lot of fun. Right. And that's we enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's very, very, very cool. Yeah. So I mean, I think anybody who gets a bottle, again, I think, this will allow you to just appreciate the history, where everything kind of started and what it is you're drinking and why. So all right, what do you say? Should we move on to the Old McBrayer?
Yeah, love to.
Yeah. All right, let's let me set that over here. We'll keep this here. We'll switch that there. Bring that. Let me pour a little glass of this. I did open them up several days ago just to kind of give them a little airtime. But I wanted to get into these, but I really wanted to have you on first to kind of experience the flavor profile, especially of this. I've not had the Old McBrayer, and I've not had the Cedar Brook yet. So I wanted to sip those along with you. So,
well, for me, I got to clear my palate because there's so much going on that WH. It takes a sip or two when I switch to Old McBrayer. So I want to make sure I clear my palate.
Yeah. And now we're kind of going to 100 proof,
We are.
Yeah.
This one's got a little bit more rye in it. So that's why we started with the high corn, even though it's a little higher proof. It's a little sweeter. But the Old McBrayer, that is a 70, 18, 12 mash bill. Let's explain what I remember to play with your corn. Do you want me? I can answer Roger's question here.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, I mean, as these guys will kind of ask some things, I'll throw it up there, and if you want to answer it, and you can be.
Yeah. So Bloody Butcher corn is almost like an Indian corn. It was an Indian corn that was grown in Kentucky in the 17 and 1800s, and so it's red. When they grow that corn, it's like a 14-foot stalk, and it's got like one ear of corn on it. So it takes a lot more acreage to grow Bloody Butcher corn than it does to grow, yellow corn. And but it's got it's a more hardy corn, so it's got a lot more I don't know, not sweetness, but it gets some of that buttery notes. It gets some of those nuttiness to it. I mean, when you throw that on the ground next to yellow corn, all the birds go to the red corn, right? And they eat it first. The deer eat it first. I mean, it's just it's a different corn. It's a sweet corn still.
Yeah.
And so, but it was an heirloom corn that was grown back in Kentucky at that time. And so now, did they use red corn or white corn or yellow corn? I don't know, right? I think they probably used whatever they could get their hands on at that time.
Right.
But that's what we wanted to do to pay honor, to the brand. So
absolutely.
So Old McBrayer was actually started by John McBrayer. It was WH's cousin in New Market, Kentucky. It was distillery number 17 that he started. And so he owned it for a little while, and then WH bought the brand later. And I call this our movie bourbon. So this one's been in several movies. I think you're going to pull up one here now.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up right now.
Right.
You guys will recognize this person, I think this was pretty cool. So I think we all know the movie here. So
yeah, so it was in the movie Untouchables. It was in the movie. It was in Deadwood, Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Glory, and they all used this label. And so I was able to recreate that label on this bottle. And so I had a guy call me one day. He was a drywaller out in Utah, and he took the drywall off of a bank down there, and he found this particular label on a bottle. It's from 1910. And so he took pictures of it. We were able to recreate it, and it was also the same one that was used in these movies. So WH bought the brand. He later sold it to W.W. Johnson, who was the distributor out of Cincinnati. They were Rectifier. They later sold the brand to E.H. Taylor. And so E.H. Taylor kept that brand. He later made it in Frankfort, Kentucky. He moved it from Newmarket to Frankfort. It was probably made, we're 99% sure it was made at what is now the Castle and Key Distillery there. And again, that brand was distributed quite a bit during Prohibition. And so for us, this is our traditional bourbon. We were able to get these barrels. We now have this particular mash bill is getting laid down for us with new make, and it's just a very traditional, smooth bourbon. These are all 6-year-old barrels here in this one.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, for 100 proof bourbon, boy, that baking spice, that rye spice really, really work well together. Again, there's a little bit of kind of a nuttiness that it has to it for me.
More of a nutmeg, or do you get the nuttiness?
Maybe a little bit of a nuttiness. I think the baking spices are definitely there, probably just kind of blended in with that kind of just rye and general spice overall. Really nice caramel notes. You know, maybe some people might also say, again, a little bit of that kind of butterscotchy feel. Again, good mouthfeel, oily, pretty viscous, I would say. Yeah, overall, I mean, like, to your point, very easy to just sit down and sip on this. You know, very easy to just sit down with this one.
Yeah. So we started out bottle and bond. I mean, obviously E.H. Taylor was part of the bottle, helped start the Bottle and Bond Act. Old McBrayer, it was one of the first bottle and bond bourbons out there. It wasn't, I don't think it was the first, but he owned the brands and he started Bottle and Bond. And the bottles we saw were Bottle and Bond back in the early 1900s. So we wanted to really start with that. I could see this label having 3 or 4 different expressions to it, a higher proof expression, maybe a double barrel expression. We'll probably build that brand out over time. And that's our traditional one. And I see this one being a very scalable product. Right. I like how the Old McBrayer label looks, how it feels. 100%. Right. It looks good. It looks good. And so
it's I mean, honestly, to me, and I've said this to you several times, it's one of the more, in terms of looking at a bottle, it's attractive because of its old style. And, nothing looks modern about it. It's only modern from the standpoint of it being so old that it's got the simplicity to it. Right.
Yeah.
But it's got that old feel. And I think, I know it's not 100-year-old bourbon, but sitting down with it and just sipping on it, it makes you think and feel the history part of it. So, I mean, that's, to me, it's an important thing. And I think for a lot of people, it becomes kind of an important thing. So what you do with this brand going forward, and hopefully you continue to make this, because I'll tell you what, it's a really nice little sipping, bourbon. It's enjoyable.
So that one right now, it's $65, but it's hard to get, right? It's got some uniqueness to it. That one was a 10-barrel blend, so we were able to get 10 really nice barrels put together. So it made it a nice bourbon.
Going back price-wise, the W.H. McBrayer, the barrel strength, what is price-wise?
So that one in the box is $100.
Yeah.
And that one's, like I said, that's serial numbered, and that's there's only 2,000 of those. And then next year they'll have a different label on it. And, we might do a few more next year. We'll see. And
of the Bottle and Bond, about how many bottles are you producing roughly of this?
So that one we did That was like 2,500 bottles or so
Okay.
when we did that release. And again, there's only a few of those left on the website, and we typically do that one in the fall. So what we do is we have our Legacy Club members on our website.
Mm-hmm.
We will send them a link with the opportunity to order when we do our releases. If the Cedar Brook, which we're going to drink next, that one sold out in 3 hours when we released that one last year. And so this one, we had some left, so we were able to open it up to the market. We are distributing to restaurants and bars in Ohio, and we have we are doing some on-premise accounts in Kentucky now, in like 3 or 4 select retailers is all we're doing.
Wow. All right, so very, very small amount of stuff with retailers. So
yeah.
All right, let me set this one over here.
All right, so we're switching to the Cedar Brook.
Yeah, let's switch to the Cedar Brook. I think for me, just to kind of give you guys an idea, I'm just going to bring up the photo of this real quick. Again, this is just kind of falling in line with, the old history of this. I mean, you can see that, again, the labeling is very similar or style wise, to the Old McBrayer. And again, I think, it starts to go back to, what all of us, tend to appreciate, from a visual standpoint, excluding, tasting the bourbon. But again, you can see, I mean, it's a beautiful old school looking label. And it just, again, it gives you that really, really nice feel of the oldness behind the brand. So let's talk a little bit about this one. This was the one that was going to be really interesting to me.
Yeah. So WH, at the urging of his wife, he changed the distillery name from WH McBrayer to Cedar Brook in the 1850s. When they sold to Julius Kessler and the Whiskey Trust, when he sold the brand, it was sold as the most famous brand in the world. And so that's a pretty bold statement. And actually, the bottle that's over at Bardstown Bourbon, that particular label has the most famous brand in the world on the label. And I wasn't going to be quite that bold when we put that bottle together. So I was able to take that logo came from another one of their bottles. We were able to take his monogram, but the script around his monogram was also on the old Cedar Brook bottles that had that label on it. So we were able to combine some of the old labels there. And his distillery. We have some old history books from Lawrenceburg. They said it was by far, it wasn't the biggest. TB Rippey was bigger at the time. However, it was by far the most famous distillery. And so for years, I'd been wanting to go see the old distillery site in Lawrenceburg. And they said, Bill, it's down Cedar Brook Road, but there's some homes back there now. So I would suggest you don't drive down there. And I said, well, what if I just drive down there and look around? They said, well, Bill, the guy that owns it, he probably will shoot you. And I'm like, come on, man, really? And they said, no, Bill, do not go down there. And so last fall, I had the opportunity to meet Danny and Celeste down there in Lawrenceburg that own the property. And they had been taking care of it for 25 years. And the guy came out, and he was absolutely the nicest guy in the world. I asked him about that. And he said, well, when I bought this property, there was a lot of bad stuff going on out in these woods, and I had to get him out of here. So I have a reputation. He said, but I've never shot anybody. And I felt a little bit better about it, and it was all good.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at Cedar Brook Creek, there it's on the property. The spring has never gone dry. And you look at the bank there, you can see where the old pump house foundations were. And then down around the corner was where the old distillery was. And you can see it from the old pictures. And the old foundations are still there. And there's a little bit of the walls. And he showed me a place where one of the homes was built back in the 1700s. Some of the stones were there. And it was just a wonderful experience. And he called me the very next day. And he said, Bill, I couldn't sleep last night. I just had to look it up. The property next door that connects to the distillery site just went for sale. And so I went and checked it out. And on this property was the old rail line. McBreer also put the rail line in. So he was a judge, state senator. He also was very involved in the rail line going through Kentucky. And so he put the rail line in Lawrenceburg. And on this property was his old rail line. And and the city of Lawrenceburg has already started funding it to be a Rails to Trails project. So on this property, the trail starts at this McBrayer site, and it goes about a mile. Then it goes over to the Cedar Brook Viaduct Bridge, looking down at the old distillery site, and then you go over the bridge, and then you end at Wild Turkey. And so I was like, well, I guess we now have our home for the next couple generations. So we now have a 130-acre site there in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. We're 90% sure McBrayer also owned that property when he owned the distillery site there. And they've already done the first phase of the trail. So our new project is they gotta fix the bridge. They got to make it safe to walk across the bridge. Yeah. That's about an 800-foot bridge, and it's pretty intimidating, but it's going to be great when it's all done. So when we come out with this in the fall, so this will be our Cedar Brook will be a September release, and we're working on trying to figure out how each bottle we sell, we can put some donations to trying to rebuild the bridge in Lawrenceburg. Yeah. And so, I'm working on potentially a bottling line and some brick houses, and someday a distillery and a tasting room, and where we can tell our story and the story of McBrayer and all the history in Lawrenceburg that was there, and take the brands home. And that's really where we're going with the next phase of this project.
Yeah, that's pretty. I mean, it's pretty incredible to hear that. And I think for anybody who was, not aware, not familiar of the brand and the history part of it, I hope this kind of gives you a little something to think about with some of these brands, is that, again, not everything is our new brands. This is going back, 150 years ago,
Yeah, almost 175 years ago is when it started.
Yeah.
And again, they were part of bourbon for 130 years. It wasn't like they were there for 20 years and Prohibition killed it, or one generation. It went several generations, even though they weren't owned by the McBrayers, because his name was such an influential name in the bourbon world. And it's just an honor really to try to bring them back, right? As a McBrayer, to learn the story, to retell the history, and to reintroduce him to the bourbon community. And really, like I said, the goal is to get him in the Bourbon Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And so, did you try the Cedar Brook yet?
I've not yet. No, I've been too fascinated by the story of everything. You've trapped me with the story there. So let me ask you about the kind of tie to any kind of mash bills or anything with this brand. Is there anything in relation that we're drinking now that would have been similar to what that would have been back in the day at all?
No. Okay. What I did with this one is I wanted it to be a different product, right? So we went with a wheated mash bill here.
Okay.
So I figured if it was good enough for Pappy and good enough for Old Fitzgerald, it's probably good enough for Cedar Brook, right? And so we went with a wheated mash bill. This is a 70-21-9 wheated mash bill.
Okay.
We only released 1,000 bottles of these last fall, and to our Legacy Club. Our Legacy Club bought these in 3 hours. So this one was, and I'm like down. I would have sent you a bottle, but I have like 5 left for the family heirloom safe, And, and so, excuse me, I'm excited about this one to come out this fall.
Yeah.
I'm excited to try to tie it back to the site, to the Cedar Brook Bridge, to bring that back to Lawrenceburg, right? And I know you've been to Four Roses, right? So when you go to Four Roses, you go over the railroad tracks. When you look to the left there's the McBrayer sign still there today. And that was the McBrayer crossing. And when you look at the old Prentice postcards, where it was Four Roses now, that was McBrayer, Kentucky, named after the judge. And
really?
So when next time you go to Lawrenceburg and you go to Four Roses, look to the left, and you'll see the McBrayer sign there that's still there today.
Interesting. And this has like, it's weird that you've tied Four Roses to this, because one of the things I was thinking is this has that soft, elegant feel to it. There's that nose. And again, Four Roses has always been one of my favorite things. But again, you have to appreciate, in my opinion, Four Roses on its own. Don't try to compare it to a lot of other things. It has its own its own lane. And this feels a little bit like that. So far on the nose, I've not even tried it yet, but on the nose, when I first smelled it, it was what it really reminded me of, was a really nice, soft, elegant kind of bourbon.
Yeah, it's definitely a soft bourbon, right?
100 proof as well. Boy, that's really nice and creamy.
Yeah.
And again, for you guys, this is a wheated bourbon. So
yeah, if you like wheated bourbons, I mean, this one, it's interesting when we do the tastings. I would say 45% of the people like the WH the best. 35% of the people like Old McBrayer better. And then the people that have, even though the Cedar Brook was a little bit younger, it was only 4 years old, that particular sample. They're like, oh man, I love this one even better. So
they're great on their own for different reasons.
Yeah, they're all unique. They're all fun, and people like them all.
Boy, this has, honestly, it has a nice kind of, I mean, for a wheater, it has a nice kind of like both caramel and peppery note to it that I'm kind of picking up. It's a really
peppery note.
Yeah, it's interesting a little bit.
I get a little, almost like an apple note to it. There are times I get almost a cereal note on the back end, depending on what I'm eating.
Yeah, I could see that. Again, there's that softness. It gives you a good idea of it being a wheated bourbon. Still nice spice, nice little finish that it has on it. Again, we were kind of talking about the sippability factor. This is definitely one of those things you could just sit down at the end of the night, 100 proof. If you're a wheated bourbon fan, sit down, pour yourself a glass of this, and man, you're kind of good for the night. So,
well,
really, really nice.
The goal for this, I mean, what do you do when somebody said your brand was the most famous brand in the world, right? Like, that's a pretty bold thing, and I mean, it was advertised that way. If you look at some of the advertisements, it was like, it stood the test of time. It was the brand, most expensive brand at the time. And so, I'm loving the notes there at the bottom. So
yeah,
it's been fun. So, the goal here is to really get this to be a 8, 10, 12-year-old bourbon, right? Ramp it up over time, take our time with this, really try to make it sure it's special. Obviously, we have to use our trademarks. We got to use it, get it out there. It's still good. Like it's still, we're not going to try to put anything out. We hope that we can build the trust of our members, that every time they get a bottle, it's going to be maybe a little bit unique. It's going to be fun. It's going to taste good. It's going to have a great story behind it, and be unique, because you're not going to get it on a mass scale. And, I started to fall in love with this business, right? We started with 10 barrels, Dad and I did. The next year we did 12 barrels. Now we're up to 1,300 barrels, right? Another couple thousand on order. We got the land now to figure out. So my goal is to make this my retirement gig, right? The dock and door business is fun, but it's way cooler to talk about bourbon, right? And so, and I like to work. I like to do things. I like to stay busy. And what better thing to do than to bring back your family's whiskey brands, right, in Kentucky, and take them home. And the city of Lawrenceburg has just been welcoming to us, and we couldn't be happier.
Yeah, it's awesome just tying all of this stuff together, and it's such an awesome thing that you kind of took the dive into all of this, and kind of, you could have stopped with 1 or 10 barrels. You could have said, hey, we don't want to do this, and just stop there, and we wouldn't all be able to kind of enjoy what it is that you're doing now. So I'm thankful that you kind of decided to, kind of push forward and do all this. I mean, obviously, to go from wanting 1 barrel to now what you're looking forward to in the future, I mean, it couldn't have been any larger, for sure. So,
well, and unfortunately, after 12 years, I'm just getting started, right? And so, but that's okay, because every year we just try to get a little bit better.
Yeah.
This is not meant to flip it. This is meant to do the rest of my life and to have fun with it, and just hopefully not lose my tail in it.
I think everybody in the whiskey industry hopes that. But again, I think for what it is that you've done and what you're doing now and where things are hopefully going in the future. I mean, it seems like, you've got a big journey ahead of you, but a big fun one at that. So
I hope so.
yeah.
Right. And God bless my wife. She's very patient with me. I'm like, yeah, I got to do some work tonight, honey. I got to drink bourbon.
Yeah. Well, we all have that. Thank God we have some wives. I'm sure there's some that aren't as fortunate maybe as you and I without the patience and the understanding, and Lord knows mine is with me as well. But it helps to have that.
And I'm doing this with my dad. So my dad
Yeah.
is now 77, and we hang out together, and he's been great. It's been a lot of fun. And, just over the last 12 years, probably, getting to just know each other even better,
Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And
you can't replace that at all.
No, my kids are 27 and 24, and they're starting their lives out. People are like, oh, you want your kids in the business? Someday that if they want to be in this business, that's great, but it's not going to be their burden, and we're going to figure it out. And we'll just see what happens. Right. We want them to find their own way. And right now when you're only selling, whatever, 1,000 6-packs, it's not much of it's a business, but it's not
right.
But what is probably the coolest thing about this is what started out as some crazy idea in my chair 12 years ago. And you just keep plugging away every year, right? You just keep doing a little bit better every year, get a little better every day, and then it became real. And so my kids got to see something. It's real now, right? And it's a real business, and it's cool. And so I think that's the biggest lesson you can take from this thing is if you put your mind to it, you just keep plugging away, and you do it for the right reasons, you'll get there.
Boy, for your kids, I mean, they've really grown up with this, from being, younger children to now where they are as young adults. They've really kind of grown up with you doing all of this.
Yeah. I mean, they were middle school and high school when I started messing around with this thing. And, it was almost a little bit embarrassing to them because Dad's talking about bourbon, and, you can embarrass your kids pretty easy when they're that age. But now it's cool, right? Oh, your dad's the bourbon guy. And, bourbon, right?
Do they enjoy it? Do they enjoy the whiskey side of things?
Yeah, they do. I mean, and my wife's learned to drink bourbon now. She'll drink bourbon with us, and go on barrel picks and drink it right out of the barrel. And I mean, she's probably got a better palate than I do at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's tying all that family history, back to where you guys are now. There's that connection, of course.
Yeah. And every step along the way, it's just like something happened and you're just like, well, I guess I got to do that. It's one of those things that just the opportunities keep presenting themselves, just like this piece of property. I mean, what are the odds the next day after being on the Cedar Brook property, the next door property that connects to it goes for sale? Yeah. It's kind of like this meant to be thing. Right. And it's pretty powerful, really.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. I mean, when you think of, again, all of that stuff and right place, right time, and the kind of the destiny of things, and I mean, was it meant to be? It sure sounds and looks like that at this point, So to be able to share all this stuff and learn and for you, I'm sure diving into all of the history and knowing more about your family and this side of things was probably maybe some of the most fun you've ever had with anything.
Well, we're very fortunate. So the McBreyer family has been studying its genealogy now for almost 3 generations. So we have a family book that's probably this thick from the 1980s that had all the McBrayers in the United States in it, and had a lot of history that was started. I now have all of our family records that have been accumulated over 100 years. It's like 30 file boxes that I got to get digitized and get out published on our website. And it's just amazing what we've been able to find and what's been out there. And then finding the old bottles and the letters, and I just found an old bar sign up in Minnesota. I got to go get from, it's a reverse painted glass bar sign. It's 4 foot by 3 foot. Back pre-prohibition. And so
crazy.
So any new releases you're excited about for 2025? Well, I'm super excited about, we'll have 2 more releases this year. We'll have our Cedar Brook in the September, and then right around November before the holidays, we'll do our Old McBrayer release. And then we do our WH McBrayer usually in April or April, right before the Derby. And so we're going to get these out next year. We're aging some of this Old McBrayer, and hopefully we'll have some different expressions of that one in the near future. And then really it's going to be about the bottling line and the site and getting that developed, and having people being able to come to Lawrenceburg and walk the trail and maybe see the old distillery site and talk about the history of Lawrenceburg.
With that part, like what's the goal for that? Is there one right now, or is that still kind of all in the works, just trying to get that all kind of put together?
Well, I'm putting together a development plan for the site now. How soon and how fast that can come together. Would I love to have a column still there and make bourbon in Lawrenceburg again? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll probably put together some kind of still so we can sell to the consumer and be on the bourbon trail, right? Whether it's a pot still of some sort, just to do some experimental batches on, maybe do some of the heirloom batches there with the WH stuff. But then really try to someday bring it back there. We have 130 acres to play with. So it's going to be a lot of fun, but there's no time frame, right? There's a lot of people producing a lot of really good bourbon in Kentucky, and there's a lot more coming on board. So, and it's not cheap to put your own still in and things like that, right? No, it's not cheap to have them even produce bourbon for you, to be honest with you. Yeah. And to figure out how much we're going to sell over the next 10 years and put that together. But that's okay, because, as long as we just keep moving forward every year, I think that's the goal. But the long-term goal would definitely to be distilling bourbon in Lawrenceburg with the McBreyer brand someday.
Pretty awesome thing when you kind of say it out loud, isn't it?
It is. But all the planets and stars will have to align to make that one happen.
Well, it seems like they're aligning and things are working out for you, so far. So everybody keep your fingers crossed that it all works out. And again, to your point, with all of the whiskey that's out there, you have the ability to just kind of, I'll say, take your time, so to speak, and make this what it is you want. You're not gonna turn it into Buffalo Trace overnight. That's impossible. You can do what you want to do and make this, your thing, and bring back and share that story of the McBreyer lineage. And I think that's, just in talking tonight, that seems like maybe the most important thing for you, is sharing that story to everybody.
It is, right? Yeah. My hope, like I said, I want to get him in the Bourbon Hall of Fame. I'd love to get his old DSP number back, right? Get the old brand back in Lawrenceburg. And, even in the dock and door business, right? I started with one service truck, 20 years ago, and just keep getting better every year. Now we have over 100 trucks, right? Yeah. It takes 20 years to build a brand.
Right.
I know what other people say they're doing and what they're trying to do today, but it takes 20 to 25 years to build a brand.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is, I mean, you might be able to speed it up and do some other things, but for me, that's how I see it.
There doesn't seem to be much rushing anything in the bourbon industry, to be honest. The building of the brand, the making of the whiskey and aging it, you're just not going to defeat time. Like, it just all needs time to grow and age and all of that.
And honestly, to learn the business, right? I had to learn how to have somebody make it for me, how to get it bottled, how to put it in a box, right? Yeah. The next phase is, how can I learn to bottle it myself and maybe age it myself? Okay, we'll learn how to do that for a little while. Then maybe we can figure out how to make something for a while, but it just takes time, right? And there's no cheating business. You can't cheat it, right? It's A to B to C. You can't go from A to Z. You got to take all the steps. And when you skip a step, it comes back to bite you.
You got it.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, I can't say thank you enough for sharing, part of the story, a little bit, of each brand and kind of why it's here and it going forward and all of that. So, I mean, I was again, I mentioned to you before, I was as interested to learn more about this that I think people that are watching tonight and watching the replay and all of that will be, to know and understand the lineage of all of this, and some of the big names that it's tied to, and maybe why they're really here today, to be honest. I mean, it's an important thing to understand the history. I mean, history in general is always a cool thing, and there's always the A to Z and everything that's in between. But understanding and knowing that, I think, will make people hopefully appreciate, what it is that you're doing, what you're trying to do, the whiskey, the bottle, everything. So, if you guys are interested in, and like Bill said, there's maybe a handful of a few of these things left. So if you're interested in getting it, it sounds like you better jump on it pretty quickly. And then one other thing I was going to ask you, as far as the availability of the Cedar Brook and becoming part of that program, how would people go about doing that? And is that an option for people?
Yeah. So if you go to our website and you sign up to be on the Legacy Club, when you'll get announcements about Cedar Brook coming out, and then we will release it, and hopefully the Legacy Club will be able to buy it all. If not, we might have some available for the people that didn't join the club. But if you really want to get it and you want to be part of that release, you need to be part of our Legacy Club, which you sign up for free on our website. And we don't bombard you with emails. We try to send out something once a quarter or so and give you updates on what we're doing and where we're at.
Yeah. Awesome.
But Scott, it's really been a privilege to be here today. For me, it's a privilege to be able to, it's an honor really to represent the McBrayers all around the country, really around the world. I've heard from people all around the world, and it's an honor to be talking about these brands, right, as a McBrayer.
Yeah.
And so thanks for having me on to share my story, and really appreciate everything you're doing for Bourbon as well. And looking forward to sharing some more whiskey with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this. I know, we'd been trying to put something together and finally got it kind of back on the schedule. So I'm glad I was able to take an hour and share a little bit more of this with everybody who's able to watch, now and down the road. So for anybody looking to follow you or anything with the McBrayer, where can people find you? Websites, Instagram, all that stuff.
Yeah, so McBreerLegacySpirits.com is our website. Same with Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome.
And if you just hit the contact us page, if you want to drop me a note, that comes right to me, and I'll be able to respond to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking a little bit of your time tonight and sharing the story with everybody. I hope this makes people, or gives everybody, again, a little bit more of an appreciation for the history and where it all started, and why it is we all love, this industry and all of these different whiskeys. I know it changed, I don't want to say my opinion. It just gave me more information to make me appreciate this stuff even more. So thanks for a little bit of that information.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Anybody watching the replay, thank you guys so much. Again, you can always reach out to me. You can reach out to Bill. He gave you some of that information. But more importantly, thank you for all the support. Thanks for tuning in tonight and watching the replay later on. Thanks, guys. Next Tuesday, I'll be gone. I'll actually be out of town, but always working on some other stuff. But again, Bill, thank you for spending some time and sharing your story tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you when we see you. Have a good one. See you, guys.